Hi, I'm Charlene Collins Freeman, and in this series of videos, we will paint these blue vintage mason jars. The reference photo is by Susie Johns, and I cropped it slightly, as you can see here, to fit my paper size. I am painting on a half sheet, 15 by 22. I am using Arches cold press 300-pound paper. Here is my detailed pencil drawing. Because I am using 300-pound paper, I will not be stretching it. If, however, you are using less than 300-pound paper, you should stretch it after getting your drawing on the paper. After drawing and stretching your paper, let it completely dry. I would even give it 24 hours. Then it's time to do the masking. There are a lot of different masking fluids on the market. I prefer Incredible White Mask Liquid Frisket. And for smaller details, I use the Molotow Graphics Art Masking Fluid, which shows up as slightly blue. It's important that your paper is completely dry, bone dry, before you apply the masking fluid. By applying masking fluid, we are preserving the whitest and lightest parts of our painting. You don't have to save the masking fluid to cover just the pure white areas of your painting. I also like to use it for the highlights and the lightest lights. So looking at this value scale, we have 10 steps from the purest white to the darkest dark. I would suggest masking any shapes that fall into the 3 lightest steps. When we look at color images, it is easy to see the lightest areas and the darkest areas. But all the color can distract us and confuse us from understanding the values that fall between the two extremes. I find it useful to print out my picture in black and white. That strips away the color and makes values much clearer. And if it's still not clear, I can print out my value scale and punch a hole in each value. Then I can compare what I'm seeing to the value on my scale and determine which areas actually fall into the 3 lightest values in my reference picture. This helps me start to break down a complicated image into smaller and smaller shapes I can manage. Once I mask out the 3 lightest values, I know that I will save the darkest values for the end of the painting. I really have to concentrate on just the middle values. To help me understand where I'm going to mask, I have a second black and white image, and I just highlight any areas that fall into the 3 lightest values on my scale. Some areas are obvious, and I can get those highlighted right away. But other areas, I'm not sure if they fall in the 3 highlighted areas, or if they're more in the middle. So I work my way through the image. This is also an additional study time. I'm really starting to break down the image and understand what I'm looking at. I used to skip all these preparation steps. I wanted to get right to the fun of painting. But with experience, I've learned that this makes my painting much more enjoyable. And I actually have fun studying my image, understanding where the values are, and how to break it down. I work my way through the reference image. By the time I'm done with this, I will have a roadmap of where I want to mask. Mapping out my values like this has really reduced the stress of figuring it out on the fly while I'm in the middle of masking or in the middle of painting. So take your time and do your preparation work. When it's time to mask, I get water and a little dish soap in my water, and I use an old brush. Before opening the bottle of masking fluid, I tilt it up and down a few times. I never shake it, although some bottles specifically tell you to shake before opening. I find that by shaking it, all the latex molecules within the bottle start to stick together. And very quickly, I end up with an unusable bottle of masking fluid, so it's enough to just tilt it once or twice. I rub a little dish soap into my brush, and then I do not rinse it out. I dip it directly into the masking fluid and start brushing in the masking on the biggest shapes. Masking fluid dries out quickly, even during the process of application, but I have found that using that dish soap slows down the process of the masking fluid gumming up on my brush, and I don't have to rinse it out as often in the water to keep it flowing. But even with dish soap, it does eventually start to gum up on the brush. I simply rinse it out in my dishwater and then go back to dipping into the masking fluid. If I have a lot of masking to do, I may eventually just rinse out the brush completely, rub in more dish soap into it, and start masking again. But I don't keep applying the dish soap every time I rinse out my brush. I use this old brush for the bigger areas. For smaller shapes and lines, I need to use a smaller tool. I do have some potter tools that I'm willing to try, but once I dip those into the masking fluid and try applying them to the paper, I realize I don't get very much coverage, and it's not the ideal tool. So I go back to using what I typically use for smaller areas, a Molotow Graphics Art masking fluid marker. The masking fluid in this marker is blue, and it is hard to remove, but I find that it is the best option I have for the smaller areas that I want to mask. I mask all the bigger shapes first and then work my way up to masking the details. When I start masking the details, I realize that I want to draw in more details on the front mason jar, particularly the wording. So I add that in pencil and then I go back to masking. Then I let the masking fluid completely dry before I start painting. Here is what my painting looks like so far with all the masking on it. Now it's time to talk about color, and I decide to do a few color swatches to figure out exactly what my palette will be. I love all the blue and green shades in the photograph, but I'm not particularly fond of the background, and I'm considering if I want to keep the tabletop the same color. So I have a few ideas and decide it's time to play with them on my scrap paper before I get to the painting. I start off with that top swatch of phthalo turquoise. Right underneath it, I put phthalo blue green shade, which is different than phthalo blue red shade. Off to the side of those two blue-green shades, I mixed them together and did a swatch of that. When I create these swatches, I tend to paint them at a whole milk consistency on one end and then lighten them up with more water on the other end. This gives me a nice idea of their value range. For the tabletop, I'm considering using buff titanium. I paint 2 rows of this. I want to wait until they dry, and then I will add paint on top of one of them. I want to see both how the buff titanium looks up against the other color swatches I've made, and I want to see how it looks with that color painted right on top. The bottom row I put green gold and then mixed it with my various other colors. I thought I may want to use it, but once I see it laid out next to my other colors, I realize it's not a good fit. This is a great aspect of doing color swatches. Plus it's a fun, no-stress way to play with color. I really like the combination of phthalo turquoise, phthalo blue green shade and buff titanium. I create another page of swatches. I have to explore some darks, especially for the background, which I do not want to make as dark and black as it is in the reference picture. On the second sheet, I start off with Cascade Green. Then I mix Cascade Green with some phthalo turquoise. Then I mix Cascade Green with phthalo blue green shade. I put a strip of quinacridone purple down, and then I mix quinacridone purple with my greens to get the really dark purple. And I like the way that looks. I think that's what I'll use in the background of my painting instead of the black that I see in the reference picture. There are some oranges and yellows, very minor in the painting as well. So I test out swatches of transparent pyrrole orange, burnt sienna, transparent pyrrole orange mixed with burnt sienna, quin gold, and new gamboge. I always go in and write in the names of my paints onto my swatches. Now that the buff titanium has dried, on one of the rows I will drop in the blues and greens I intend to use in the painting. I also drop in some water with a teardrop. I just want to see how these colors mix and mingle with the buff titanium. I'm pretty happy with the results and think this is a good way to go. Here are the color swatches I made to test out colors for this painting. In the next video, we'll start painting. See you there.